Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
The program, thank you so much. This is hour number 2. My name is Paul. You've found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We are building a liberty machine here. For those of you watching on Facebook Live and over at paulharrell.com, we got kind of a 3-person split screen in here. I want to welcome back to the studio. We have Secretary of State Mark Martin is with us. Mark, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me on again.
Absolutely. And we have Pastor Iverson Jackson is with us, who's going to be at the Arkansas State University Student Union giving the keynote speech for the Arkansas State Young Republicans. Iverson, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you, Paul.
Really glad that you could be here. Let's start with you.
Okay.
The speech here, this is 7:30 tonight, and Arkansas State University Young Republicans, as well as State Representative Dan Sullivan, bringing you in. And the topic is One Nation Under God. Tell us a little bit about that.
One Nation Under God, that's that part, One Nation Under God, that's what we are. That's what our founders envisioned when you look at the Declaration of Independence, when they talk about we owe these truths to be self-evident, that, that we are endowed by our Creator. So they acknowledge that we are a creator. And then they go on to tell us that our Creator gives us certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Among them, we have many more than that, but those are the ones that they named. Mm-hmm. And so those only come when you're one nation under God. You look at any nation that disavows God, they don't have the liberty that we have, and that's why we have the illegal immigration problem that we have. People are not fighting to get out of America. They're fighting to get in America because this is where freedom lives.
Yeah, that's good. And there actually is, a lot of people don't realize this in today's day and age, but, the idea of founding a country, recognizing the existence of a higher power.
Right.
You look at totalitarian states, and they are the higher power. They don't recognize that. So it's kind of about establishing the country in humility.
Absolutely.
Versus, saying we have it all figured out. So there's a theology there.
Absolutely.
About the Creator.
Right. This is what guided our founders. And I know you'll have people say, well, you had founders that didn't even believe in God, or, they were deists and so forth and so on. That does not mean that they did not understand and agree with the principles of liberty that are found in the Holy Scriptures. And that's where people are missing it. They're missing, like, for instance, with Thomas Jefferson. When you look at his monument in Washington, D.C., I've been there many, many times, and you'll see statements that he made about God, and you would think this man is a Pentecostal. And here people are saying that he wasn't, that he didn't believe in God. Well, that's about as far from the truth as you can get. He read his Bible, he knew what the Bible says, and he understood that these liberties that we enjoy today, the few that are left, only come from God and not from man. And if something comes from God, then no man can take it away from you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I want to turn now to Secretary of State Mark Martin. So Mark, what brings you here to this neck of the woods for this event tonight?
I was just invited up by my friend Dan Sullivan, and I figured I'd come up and show some support for him.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, one nation under God, that's something that I think a lot of people here in Arkansas, it really resonates with. Yes. And you see what the state of the country is now, and there's no question that we're kind of experiencing what looks like to be a slow moral decay. Talk about that a little bit.
Well,
or your thoughts on that?
One of the things that I would actually start with is whether or not we recognize it, or any country recognizes it or not, we're under God. We're either under God's judgment or we're under His blessing. Whether or not we want to recognize His sovereignty in the matter or not, that's really the starting point. I'm reminded of a quote by Abraham Kuyper I'd like to read to you. He says, "There's not one square inch of the whole domain of human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine." What's he talking about whenever he's developing these ideas? Well, the overall idea that is going on here is everything that's going on is under God's authority. How does He then delegate His authority in the world? And God first delegates who has more authority over you than anyone else. Ultimately, everybody would say God. But then, you move away from God, and then you're talking about the authority that an individual has over his own self-discipline. Now, Kuyper looked at things from spheres going out from oneself. As you go farther and farther from oneself, your personal authority diminishes. and you get a situation where more and more things are delegated to God to take care of. You hear some of the Austrian economists call it the invisible hand. Some people call it providence or whatever. So when we begin to talk about ultimately where we're at, some things may come and go. We may not be one nation. We may not be a nation at all. But one thing that we will be is under God.
Yeah, that's very well said. You just think about where the state does come in. You talk about delegating authority. That's certainly a part, of the whole situation. Right. You have Paul in the New Testament saying, "Hey, we hope that we are able under the state to go about the gospel in peace."
Right.
There is certainly evidence out there of
absolutely
where it's easier, when you're freer, things are a lot easier. I mean, versus the totalitarian history that we have in the 20th century alone.
Well, and that's what's unique about this country is when we begin to look at the delegation of authority from that perspective, we see that it's centered on individuals. Every individual is endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. What we see here is a biblical pattern for government taking shape. Whether or not you believe in a creator or nature, I think it's evident in nature even that individual rights are what are supreme, because the individual is the one that's delegated the most authority to supervise himself. And of course, what's supervising ourselves? That's taking responsibility, right? So the pattern that the founders put together, whether or not they recognize it as a creator or as natural law, it's what's naturally the order of things, and self-government is the first order. And when you say the smallest form of self-government is individual.
That's correct.
So what you were pointing out there is a very, very deep theological concept.
Yeah. So we're talking with Secretary of State Mark Martin and Pastor Iverson Jackson. Iverson is going to be at Arkansas State University tonight with the ASU Young College Republicans, giving this talk about, one nation under God. It's very exciting. So tell us a little bit about, if you can, if you go all the way back to the founding and you go to what all of the sermons that were preached up and down the colonies, beforehand, it had a lot to do with what we're talking about. Being an individual before a holy God, being responsible. That's something. And then all of a sudden you start to think, well, if everybody is equal under God, then how come there's a royal bloodline that's somehow more special than everybody else?
Yeah. Go back to the Constitution, what you were talking about, and the connection with one nation under God. What our Constitution really is a collection of sermon topics. When you go through it and look at it, it's a collection of sermon topics that were preached up and down the colonies, that, as you stated earlier, up and down the colonies, that our founders just start putting these things together because our government, in Romans it tells us that governments are ordained by God, God being the higher power. So he delegates to man governments, but those governments are also to be under the auspices of God, and that makes it fair for everyone. That's how Thomas Jefferson came up with what he did. Let's think about this. I can say this is what's true. You can say, no, this is what's true. So there has to be an objective truth. We call that absolute truth. And this is what you get when you're under God. The truth does not have any friends, but it makes a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
Okay? So you can be a truth of the friend, but the truth is not going to try to be your friend. It is what it is. Yeah. So that's what we had. Remember that when we were growing up, we heard the term the golden rule. Well, where did that come out of? That came right out of the scripture, when Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. That's an objective truth. It doesn't matter how much money you have, where you live, what color you are. So all these things come when you're under God. So you have to maintain that. That's what makes this nation so great, this ideal. And the aligning of truths, when, people talk about the founders and, owning slaves and so forth and so on like that. But the very words that they wrote, the truth, had to line up with the truth, and eventually the truth caught up with this nation, and we've, that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about, the Civil War. So all these things began to unfold because it's part of the truth. And as Jesus said in Matthew 5:6, if you hunger and thirst after righteousness, you shall be filled. In other words, if you are a truth seeker, the truth will eventually come forward. And so our founders understood that, and that one nation under God is what makes everything fair and equal for every person. Now, I love what Mark was talking about, the personal freedoms. There's nothing like personal freedom. It's remember the parable that Jesus told about the talents. He gave 1 5, 1 2, and 1 1. And each had an opportunity to do according to their own ability, whatever they desired to do with those talents. That's what personal freedom is. If I want to become something special in life, then I have the right when a nation is under God to be that. And if I want to just stand on the side of the road and hold a sign, well, I also have the freedom to do that. You can only get that when you're under God. We're not in a caste system where you have to be what the government tells you want to be.
Yeah,
so this is what's so powerful, one nation under God.
So we're going to be back here in just a moment with Secretary of State Mark Martin and Pastor Iverson Jackson. I have a few more questions. One of them has to do with, and this is just my own personal kind of thing that I've come up with, or thoughts that I've had about the state of the country today and how the younger generation is able to recognize injustice. They just don't know what to do about it. So we're going to be back in just a minute, folks. Don't go anywhere. The Liberty Machine rolls on next. Come back to the program. Joe, I'm just saying I really admire you. I'm having to produce my own show, and it's not easy. So I'm just letting you know. Thank you for everything, Joe, our board up. I'm in the command center post because this is where our third mic is. All right, joining us now, we've got Secretary of State Mark Martin, who's back with us. Mark, thank you for being on the show, sir.
Thanks a lot.
And also we have Pastor Iverson Jackson. Now, he's going to be at this event, One Nation Under God. The College Republicans at A-State are hosting him. Also, the Arkansas Family Council Director, Jerry Cox, will be there. So that's going to be fun. Admission is free. It's tonight at 7:30 at Arkansas State University on the third floor of the Student Union. Seating is limited, but come one, come all right now. I want to talk a little bit about Iverson Jackson. He is the senior pastor of Zoe Bible Church in Little Rock. You received your bachelor's in business administration in 1985 from Southern Arkansas University and a master's degree in public administration from Webster University. And you're also retired as a lieutenant colonel in the military. So certainly thank you for your service. Tell us about how you wound up at Zoe Bible Church.
At Zoe Bible Church?
Yeah, Zoe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Zoe.
My
it's a Greek word which means life.
Okay.
So it looks like it's pronounced Zoe.
I was the whole ecclesia college scandal. I've been pronouncing ecclesia wrong for a long time, and somebody finally was like, "You're saying it wrong. This means church. You need to know how to say this word." Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Zoe Bible Church is the church that my wife and I founded in 1997, and so that's how we wind up there because we started the church there. So
good.
We just love what God has called us to do there.
Okay, so today in society, you mentioned a lot of people's problem. Look. You mentioned people what they say about the founders owning slaves and everything, and kind of using that to make basically kind of discount everything that we have here today that might be good. And as I look, across the scriptures and Bibles, you see God using non-perfect men, broken men.
Those are the only ones in the Bible,
exactly.
except for one.
Except for one, right?
Except for one.
I mean, you look at some of our best guys.
Right.
You look at David. I mean, he's an adulterer, a murderer. I mean, bad stuff.
Can't control his children.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and this is lost on our generation where they look back in America and they see all that we have today, and they can recognize injustice. They can recognize slavery, okay? Right. They can recognize an injustice like, even if we take all the history books that the liberals write about, Columbus and everything that happened, and they can't reconcile it, though. Right. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I really think this is the problem, is they can recognize injustice. And what they're really seeking is the perfect approval of a holy God, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But they're trying to right the wrongs of history by editing it, getting rid of statues, in an effort to reconcile themselves. Feel free to
you can't. Going back to the founders, again, our school systems have failed our students. For the most part, our public school systems have failed them. Because if you understand history in the context of what we're talking about, the United States of America, when I talk to people and I say, well, how long was slavery in America? A lot of times people say 400 years or 200, 300 years. I said, no, it was in America, in the United States of America for only 87 years. Because prior to that, there was no United States of America prior to 1776. There was no United States of America. There was an America, but not United States of America. And as part of the British crown, the colonies, they were forced to have slaves. Now, when I say forced, I don't mean they just brought slaves and said you had to have them. But you could not, by British law, free your slaves. So George Washington wanted to free his slaves. Thomas Jefferson wanted to free his slaves, but they were not allowed to free their slaves by British law. One of the most ardent supporters of the abolition of abolishing slavery in the United States was Thomas Jefferson. And these are facts that cannot, they're just a part of history. But if you only look surface deep, then you'll only see Thomas Jefferson, the slaveholder. And with respect to our young people, and, they're only hearing one part of the story. Because, if you listen to what we call the major networks, you're just going to hear all the negative about the United States of America, which is ironic because in this country, this is the only country they can say what they want to say because of the First Amendment. So those very founding fathers that they are denigrating are the reason they have the freedom to say what they're saying about them. So our young people just need to hear the truth. And then when you have the truth, then you can make a decision. And that's what we're going to present tonight. It's the truth. So we want people to come out and hear that truth. And if our young people hear the truth, it's never failed anywhere I've been, just telling people the truth and then let them go with that. Let them wrestle with their conscience against the truth.
Yeah, that's a great concept. Secretary of State Mark Martin, what are your thoughts on what is young people wanting to edit history to try to reconcile an injustice, but the real answer they're just missing?
Well, in a lot of ways they're missing kind of some of the history because it's not being presented to them. But in other ways, I think that maybe the millennials are recognizing something that we've lost along the way that you were pointing to, is that because of social media, and we know more and more about the personal lives of everybody, that we are always voting for the lesser of evils. I mean, even when I'm on the ballot, I'll just admit, you're not voting for the greater good. You're voting for the guy that's less bad. And by God's grace, hopefully you do pick the one that's that way. That's right, but probably my heart's no better than the next guy. So I think that maybe our millennials and our younger people are starting to see that we're all flawed human beings. The next hurdle and that's a great thing. The next thing for our young people to get over is a flawed human being pointing to the truth and proclaiming the truth, even when his life doesn't measure up, doesn't make him a hypocrite. It makes him someone that aspires to be better. And maybe if our young people can, now that they recognize that we're all fallen, and we're not going to measure up, now we need to get them to recognize, to take that next step, that you're not a hypocrite for proclaiming the truth that you can't necessarily live up to. So maybe there's some hope there, right? Yeah.
Hey, that's a lot more. You guys are a lot more optimistic than I am. Maybe it's because I'm one of these bitter guys because they claim that I'm supposedly a millennial, and no, I'm not. I'm an Oregon Trail generation. I'm different. Well, I certainly appreciate it. We're about out of time for this segment, and I know I would like to come back from break if we can do one more with you, Iverson, and we're going to bring in Hannah Webb, who's the Arkansas State University College Republican. President, is that what it is? Chair? Okay, chair, president. Anyway, she's the leader of them. And so I want us to do one little quick segment. When we come back with that, folks, Mark, it's great to have you in the studio again. Yes, sir. And Iverson will be right back with you. Folks, don't go anywhere. It is the Paul Harrell Program. We're talking about this weird, strange concept, one nation under God, back in just a moment.